You're there to represent the family, who are obviously desperate to have her daughter home. They must be very aware, though, that there's a big proportion of the UK that doesn't want her back.
No, indeed, but, I mean, it's their daughter and their grandson now who just, came into existence really yesterday. And I think any parent would feel the same thing. It wouldn't matter if the entire planet were against you. You'd want to have your children and grandchildren back with you in safety.
Is she your client?
No, it's the family.
You're the family.
Yeah.
But she's part of the family, so does that cover her? Are you speaking for her?
No, I can't, because she hasn't formally engaged me.
So you've not spoken to her?
I have never spoken to her.
Do we know how much of what she's been saying in these interviews, or the first one with the Times and now Sky Television, is true? I mean, are we able to take it at face value? Has she had 2 children, and have they died?
Well, she was married to somebody who's a Dutch national. He has parents as well, and they can confirm that they had 2 grandchildren who died.
So she's not making it up?
Well, no.
As far as you're aware?
Yeah, sure.
What do you make of the fact that she seems devoid of regret or remorse?
Well, I think it's difficult to take what she says in the current circumstances that she's in and try and draw from the lack or otherwise of emotion that she has. I mean, as we say, she's a traumatised person, finding herself in a camp. She clearly very much attached to her husband, it would seem, and he's certainly not by her side. I would imagine that was her only real port of call for anything in Islamic State. She
doesn't look traumatised. She doesn't sound traumatised. She sounds very, very together, to me. She seems very self-possessed, actually. I wouldn't say she's traumatised.
You might have said the same thing about First World War soldiers in the middle of shell shock, so...
It's a bit of a comparison, isn't it? It's a bit of a stretch.
Well, it's a war zone, and they're both war zones.
But she talks fine. My grandfather was a First World War veteran, and he found it very difficult to talk about some of the things that he'd seen, and always did. She seems to have no difficulty talking about seeing severed heads in bins, and being, as she said, OK with, and I quote, the executions that she witnessed.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't try and compare your grandfather
with
a
19-year-old. You made that analogy. You did. You brought that into the conversation. I didn't.
So I don't know your grandfather, but I do know that there are people who are...
You compared her to a First World War veteran. I would suggest that that's not a comparison that stands up for a second.
OK. That's your view, yeah, sure.
I think I'm right. I think it's more than a view. I think it's a statement of fact.
I'm sure you have a TV show because you think you're right all the time, but...
I don't think I'm right all the time. I frequently make mistakes. I just think to compare that girl to a First World War veteran is a foolish comparison.
In both cases, the individuals concerned are people who've gone through trauma, and people react differently in those settings. So what we're suggesting is that she's assessed by a professional, not just remotely over a few minutes by a TV camera, and then a view taken about what she's saying and how that's come to be.
As a lawyer, do you think she might be charged with treason?
It's very unlikely. Treason is framed in a way that's against the Crown itself.
What is the process? Because I think there are people that feel she chose to go there, albeit she might have been brainwashed and certainly groomed and persuaded this was a good thing to do. She chose to go there. She didn't rush home at the first opportunity. She decided she wants to come home now because ISIS has collapsed and as a state there. Who is going to... People are thinking, why should we pay for this? Why should we pay for her to be rehabilitated? Obviously, the family want their daughter back, but you can understand why people might think, well, hang on, that was your choice.
Well, I mean, it's an argument that's particularly cutting for me as well. The families, when I represented all of them, had, from the very off, tried to get their children back the minute they realised that, or got the news that they'd gone. We ourselves had taken ourselves to the border regions of Turkey to get Khadija Sultana back, and she unfortunately didn't... she died. She was killed in an airstrike. So, in terms of bringing Shamima back over, she's a British citizen at the end of the day. There's an innocent child here, and
I mean,
the baby, yeah, her baby. And bringing that child back into safety is a duty that any moral state would have. We can understand, certainly, that the public is repulsed by...
And also the fact that they're worried that there might be a security risk. The family might not think so, but then the family didn't spot that she was about to do this anyway, did they? What do you think about the process which allowed her to leave? Well,
I mean, this is an important question. There were serious failings, not people have pointed out that the families would know what were happening in the lives of a 15-year-old girl, but I think anyone with a 15-year-old would know that you don't always know what's going on. And one of the big questions that we have is that the school and the social services, local council, headed up by John Biggs at the time, simply didn't, they cut her out, or the families out, of any information and intelligence with respect to this being...
And that was for reasons, though, wasn't it? That they were trying to... I mean, we have tried to get comments from them, but we haven't done so far. But part of the reasoning of that was they were trying to see if the families were also involved. It was part of the process. And the police have since admitted that mistakes were made, haven't they?
That's absolutely right. Police have admitted that, but also, since that time, there should have been a serious case review by the council over the loss of these children, and that has repeatedly not happened. And it should have happened at least twice. Once when the girls left, back in 2015, and at least again when Khadija Sultana was killed.
Right. All right.
Well, let's go to... Yes. Should we go to Tanya Joy now, who is British, now living in America, and was radicalised and spent 10 years, didn't you, married to a very senior member of Islamic State, of the American a member of Islamic State. What do you make of this? Do you look at the case of Shamima and see yourself and the moment when you realised you wanted to go back home? What do you make of it, and what will happen to her, do you think, in terms of changing the way she thinks from where she is now to back into normal life?
OK, so what I think is I was a silly, naive teenager, similar to Shamima. I think at 19 years old, I probably would have made the most foolish... At 15 years old, I would have made the same mistakes, maybe, as she had. I think that it boils down to her not having, and myself not having, been raised with the right value system of Western values and freedom of thinking, and the freedoms that we have. I just didn't understand it. I don't believe Shamima understood it. I don't think that she had the value system to give her so that she could make the right choices in life. I know personally from Muslim backgrounds, when you're raised in a Muslim household, a conservative Muslim background, we're not raised to believe that you have to respect the rule of law. We're told to fear God, and we're shamed and we're humiliated, and if we're disobedient to a 7th century idea of an Arab God. I feel sorry for her because I feel she doesn't know any better. I had the opportunity to have exposure, and I learned for myself that there are better, like we have a justice system that is a lot more comprehensive and understands just human beings. But she's thinking in terms of a 7th century law, yes. And she's thinking beheadings is fine. She's thinking that executions are fine only because she thinks there's an afterlife, and she's been deceived, she's been lied to, and this is all she's been hearing for the last 5 years.
Can we ask you, how long did it take for you to be de-radicalised? What was the process from believing fervently in this mission that you and your then partner were on, into being the person you are now? How long did that take, and how did that work?
It took 10 years. From 2009, it was after my second son was born, and I was more in tune with American culture, and I was understanding freedom, and I valued it. It's not something it wasn't a principle that I was raised with. I was raised to believe that freedom is contrary to what God wants, and that we are prisoners. Muslims are supposed to be prisoners in this life and paradise in the next life. So I would say that back then, when I was a radical, I didn't understand that this is all we have, that we get one chance in life. And I really was a foolish, superstitious girl. Do you think that when I was younger, and I grew out of it.
Do you think that and it's likely that she will come back to the UK, whatever people think, that's likely to happen. And this is therefore likely that she will go on some kind of de-radicalisation programme, whatever processes of law fall into place. Listening to the way she's speaking, looking at her, identifying with her, as you have done, do you think she can be de-radicalised? Do you think that in a few years' time she could be sitting here, for example, and saying, boy, did I get it wrong?
I hope so. I want to be optimistic for her child's sake. Yeah. I don't think she knows any other value system other than what she's been indoctrinated with. And coming from a Muslim background, they're not going to be teaching liberalism and progressive ethics. So I can only hope that, like, I would love to be in contact with her. I'd like to correspond with her and other returnees from Islamic State and teach them a way of life. I want to teach them the reality, and I want to break down the falsehood of the propaganda that they've been exposed to and indoctrinated with.
And that's what you do now. That's a lot of the
thought.
work you do now, is to work with. Tanya, one of the things that we found here in the UK, hard to get our head around, is the apparent lack of regret that she's expressing at the moment. There doesn't seem to be any more.
That infuriated
Is that
me.
usual? Is that usual for someone in her state? And why would that be? Do you think you would have been able to at that point in time?
I think it's because she's... No, I think it's because she's a 19-year-old girl who hasn't really matured. And she's surrounded in an environment that thinks only one way, a very narrow way of thinking. I was reading a Guardian article today about how when women leave the camps without covering their faces, they get beaten up by the Russians and the Tunisian gangs who have left ISIS. So they're under pressure to comply, and if they don't conform, they're going to get beaten, and their children are going to get beaten. Mm-hmm. We need to take her out of that environment, and we need to educate her. And we can reprogram her. I did it on my own. But I believe that if, you know, she did better at school, at high school, than I ever did, and I believe she's a smart girl. We just have to, to break down that fear factor and help her, you know, see the truth.
Well, you certainly know of what you certainly know of what you speak, Tanya, because you've been there. Very quickly, one last very quick question. Do you think she has been traumatised? That's what the family lawyer said. He thinks that she's in trauma. Would you agree with that?
I believe so.
Yes.
Even if she doesn't want to show it. I mean, she shows arrogance right now, but I think that's just I think it's a wall that she's putting up to cope. It's her coping mechanism. Mm-hmm. I think deep down inside, she's a very broken human being.